I call it a corollary. It's not a proof there. It seems to be implied in what's gone before. But he goes further than that. And if the first is sort of a logical corollary, the second are more postulates that we are led to in the light of the ethic, additional postulates. That is to say, the achievement of goodwill, the only thing that's intrinsically good, the achievement of goodwill in this life is never completed. You don't achieve moral perfection in this life. Moreover, there is that natural God-given desire for happiness, which is never fully achieved in this life while pursuing duty in the face of one's desires. So for both these reasons, there must be a continuation of this life in which your moral development continues and is rewarded with happiness. The immortality of the soul is a practical necessity. And what he means by practical is it's necessary to practical reason. Practical reason is moral thinking. That is to say, if moral thinking makes any sense, you have to postulate in addition a life hereafter in which the moral quest, the quest for the good, the goodwill, can be achieved. Moreover, if there is to be a future life in which that is possible, then we have to postulate the existence of a moral being who would guarantee happiness that is proportionate to one's virtue. So you have two morally necessary postulates of practical reason: immortality of the soul, of God. Now, what he does in his religion book is to spell that part of it out more fully. He spells that part of it out more fully. And let me give you a quick rundown of that. Let's see. In this way. What he's doing is trying to see correlations between the things he has described in the moral consciousness and the concept of God and the traditional religious attitude, the attitude towards God. Now, in the moral consciousness, what we're finding is that reason, via the categorical imperative, reason legislates, tells us what is right, tells us what to do. Reason legislates. Yes, you see, in the correlate there is the conception of God as the holy, righteous lawgiver, with the appropriate religious attitude of reverence, awe, that includes obedience. The moral consciousness also manifests a natural inclination to happiness, often in tension with what reason legislates. Correlated with this is the recognition that God is the good provider who blesses our obedience. And the religious attitude is one, of course, of grateful love. In the moral conscience as well, moral consciousness rather, there is the experience of conscience. That is to say, of something which jogs you, pricks, when you have a bad conscience. And the correlate here is the conception of a just judge who judges the moral worth of action. And accordingly, the religious attitude of respect, a fear of the Lord, so forth. Now, it's difficult to know exactly what he means. Is he simply saying that the God whose existence we have to postulate has to be this sort of a God, and this is the way God really is? Yes, and this is the way we should respond to him. Is that what he's saying? Or is he saying that the conception of God and the religious life is simply a psychological projection of our religious experience, of our moral experience? Now, the latter route, of course, is taken by the ethical humanist, naturalistic interpretations of religion. And the former interpretation, that this is the way God is, the way that was taken by the more traditional religious approaches, with qualifications. And out of this approach to talking about God developed some of the early strains of 19th century liberal theology. Because if your theology is simply an extension of your ethics, then you have a new theological method which doesn't go as far as the biblical revelation. So one strain of 19th century liberal theology emerged out of Kant's thinking at this juncture. Incidentally, Kant vowed in letters that he Christian accused of doing so, you see, and was forbidden to teach or to publish. In defense, he defended himself. Now, for a man who said that lying is always wrong, it would be hard to think when he said that. But the debate goes on. In addition to that, in the religion book, what he does is to talk about the kingdom of God, talk about the Christ. Christ, you see, represents in Christian religion the ideal of moral perfection, the great example. The death of Christ is the supreme example of acting out of a sense of duty. Not my will, but thine. You see. And so Kant, in that context, gave birth to what since became known as the example theory of the atonement. You see. The example theory. The significance of the death of Christ was in providing a supreme moral example. And if that is all that is said, then obviously the Orthodox Christian traditions are going to object to Kant, that it at least is not enough. Now, whether he intended there to be more is difficult to know. It's certainly clear that the title of his book, he's not pretending to say everything that there is about religion that can be said, but only what can be said within the limits of reason alone. Perhaps the significant thing is, at this juncture, that whereas the Enlightenment wanted to demonstrate the basic truths of religion, Kant doesn't try. That sort of metaphysical proof isn't possible. But he does maintain it is rational to postulate the basic truths of religion, you see. And it's the overall rational coherence of the resultant scheme that involves a moral lawgiver and so forth, which makes it so plausible and so rational a postulate. So in terms of justifying belief, you'd have to say that, that Kant really is a coherentist in terms of the overall coherence of the thing. Well, our time has more than gone, I'm afraid.